It always starts the same way. A silent room, a glowing screen, and a deadline staring at you like a ticking bomb. Hours pass. You tell yourself you should start, but something inside you refuses to move until the cliff's edge appears. Then suddenly, your heart spikes, adrenaline floods your chest, and you come alive. The panic becomes fuel, the urgency becomes oxygen, and that old familiar guilt whispers, "Why do I always wait this long?" Here's the truth you never learned. You don't procrastinate because you're lazy. You procrastinate because your brain is wired to respond to pressure, to wait for emotional fire before it lets you rise. The real question isn't why you delay. It's why your mind learned to only activate when danger feels close. Because this isn't a flaw. It's a survival pattern your brain built long before you ever had deadlines. You've been taught to treat procrastination like a time management problem, as if you just needed better planners, better habits, better discipline. But if it were really about time, you would have fixed it years ago. Procrastination isn't a scheduling issue. It's an emotional regulation strategy. Every time you avoid a task, your brain isn't thinking, "I'll do this later." It's thinking, "I can't handle how this feels right now." Because the moment you sit down to start, something subtle and invisible happens inside you. Your emotional brain, the limbic system, steps in front of your executive brain, the prefrontal cortex, and quietly hijacks the controls. Logic wants to begin, emotion wants to escape, and emotion almost always wins. Psychologists call this the task-threat response, a state where your brain interprets a task not as a neutral activity, but as a potential threat. Threat of failure, threat of judgment, threat of not being good enough. So you delay, not because you're irresponsible, but because your nervous system is trying to protect you from discomfort. This is why you can write lists, set reminders, pep talk yourself, and still end up scrolling, pacing, avoiding. Your brain isn't choosing laziness, it's choosing safety. And this is also why logic loses every time. You can know a task is simple. You can know you have enough time. You can know starting early would feel good. But the moment discomfort shows up, even a whisper of doubt or pressure, your emotional brain slams on the brakes. And you're left wondering why you can't do something so small, when deep down, the truth is enormous. This emotional pattern didn't begin as an art. Long before you ever stared at a deadline, your nervous system was learning how to survive your childhood. Procrastination didn't start with school, or work, or adulthood. It started in rooms where your feelings were shaped, silenced, or stretched too thin. For some of you, the pattern began with perfectionism. You grew up believing mistakes weren't allowed, not because anyone said it outright, but because approval only came when you were exceptional. A flawless grade, a perfect performance, a good job that felt more like conditional love than genuine connection. So now, as an adult, starting anything feels dangerous, because starting means risking imperfection, risking disappointment, risking being seen as less than perfect. You don't delay because you're careless. You delay because your inner child still trembles at the thought of not being enough. For others, the pattern began in chaotic homes, places where calm rarely existed, where shouting, unpredictability, or neglect kept your nervous system in a constant state of hypervigilance. You learned to activate only under stress, because stress was the only time anyone reacted, the only time things moved, the only time you felt real. So now crisis feels familiar, pressure feels like home, and calm feels suspicious, like the quiet before the storm. And then there are those who grew up in over-controlled homes, every choice monitored, every move corrected, every emotion criticized. Your freedom wasn't taken away loudly, it was taken away quietly, through micromanagement and fear, until your brain learned to freeze, waiting for permission, waiting for pressure, waiting for someone to say, "It's time, do it now." You weren't lazy, you were conditioned to believe that urgency equals action, and calm equals paralysis. So when you sit in the present moment, trying to start something peacefully, your past whispers the old rules. You only move when the world is on fire. And from these roots, from perfectionism, chaos, and over-control, 3 psychological identities begin to form. There are 3 distinct psychological profiles that explain why some people only move when the clock is running out. And if you listen closely, you'll hear your own story inside one of them. Maybe even all 3. The first is the person who becomes a pressure seeker, someone who doesn't fully wake up until the deadline starts breathing down their neck. They don't mean to wait. They don't plan to wait. But their nervous system only flips on when adrenaline hits. For them, stress isn't the enemy. Stress is the starter pistol. It's the activation energy their brain can't generate on its own. The last-minute rush creates a dopamine snap, a sudden surge of focus, clarity, and determination that almost feels addictive. Without urgency, everything feels foggy, distant, or dull. But with it, they feel sharp. They feel capable. They feel like themselves again. Then there's the person who becomes an avoider, someone who isn't running toward the deadline. They're running away from the emotion attached to the task. Starting means facing the possibility of failure, judgment, or not being good enough. So waiting becomes a shield, a way of staying safe without ever saying, "I'm scared this won't turn out well." Inside, they tell themselves, "I'll do it when I feel ready." But readiness isn't the real issue. They're waiting for the fear to shrink. And fear doesn't shrink on its own. And finally, there is the person who becomes a self-doubter, the perfectionist shadow. This is the overthinker, the planner, the one who rewrites the plan 3 times before touching the first step. They imagine every mistake before it even exists. They rehearse failure instead of progress. And the task becomes so heavy in their mind that they freeze under the weight. Their inner narrative sounds like, "What if I mess this up? What if it's not good enough? What if I start and fail?" And so the quiet belief forms. If I don't start, I can't fail. Different stories, different coping mechanisms, but the same emotional heartbeat, a nervous system trying to protect you. But these behaviors, every delay, every panic, every last-minute sprint, hide something deeper. When you peel back the layers of procrastination, you don't find laziness. You find emotion, raw, tangled, unspoken emotion. And the first thing you see is the shame cycle. It always follows the same pattern. You procrastinate, you panic, you push through the pressure, you finish, you feel relief. And then guilt slowly creeps back in, whispering, "Why do I always do this?" That guilt doesn't come from the task itself. It comes from the belief that something is wrong with you. A belief shaped by years of being misunderstood. Inside the mind of a last-minute person, there are 2 quiet sentences that shape everything. "I only work well under pressure." And, "If I start early, I'll discover I'm not good enough." The first belief gives you permission to wait. The second belief traps you there, because starting early forces you to confront your fears. Fear that your best won't be good enough. Fear of disappointing someone. Fear of disappointing yourself. So your brain protects you by creating distance, pushing the task far enough away that the emotions attached to it feel less sharp. And then there's time blindness, the inability to feel time moving until it's almost gone. For many people who procrastinate, the brain struggles with dopamine regulation. Low dopamine makes starting feel impossible, but rising dopamine under pressure makes finishing feel exhilarating. This is why calm moments feel unsafe. Calm doesn't activate you. Calm doesn't motivate you. Calm doesn't give you that chemical push you've relied on your entire life. So you wait. Not because you want to, but because your nervous system doesn't know another way. But here's the twist no one tells you. What if procrastination isn't sabotaging you, but protecting you? Here's the part almost no one realizes. Procrastination isn't the enemy. It's the shield your mind built to protect you. Every delay, every distraction, every moment you freeze before starting. It's not rebellion. It's protection. Protection from failing. Protection from being judged. Protection from feeling the discomfort you never learned how to sit with. Your brain isn't trying to ruin your life. It's trying to keep you emotionally safe. When a task feels threatening to your confidence, to your identity, to how others might see you, your nervous system steps in and says, "Not yet, you're not ready for that pain." That's why urgency hits you differently. Urgency is the only thing strong enough to override the emotional fear beneath the surface. Pressure pushes past doubt, past insecurity, past the fear of not being enough. In that moment, survival mode takes over, and suddenly, you can move. Not because the task became easier, but because the fear became louder than the feelings you were avoiding. This entire pattern, waiting, freezing, sprinting, wasn't something you chose. It was something you learned, a survival response shaped by years of emotional terrain you had no control over. And once you understand that, the shame begins to loosen. Because you're not fighting time. You're fighting fear. And once you see that fear clearly, everything changes. If procrastination is a survival response, then healing isn't about forcing discipline. It's about rewiring your emotional safety system so your brain no longer needs panic to move. The first step is the 2-minute emotional exposure start. You don't begin the task. You begin the feeling. 2 minutes of sitting with the discomfort, not running from it, not numbing it, until your nervous system learns, "This isn't danger, I can stay here." Next is shrinking the perceived threat. Instead of asking, "How do I finish this?" ask, "How do I make this feel safe?" Break the task into steps so small your brain can't interpret them as danger. Safety replaces threat. Calm replaces panic. Then come identity-based micro-habits. You're not trying to be productive. You're practicing being the kind of person who shows up for themselves in small, steady ways. Tiny completions build self-trust. And self-trust rewires everything. You also create intentional micro-deadlines, gentle bursts of pressure without the emotional chaos. A sustainable version of the intensity your brain responds to. Slowly, you begin forming a new identity. Someone who doesn't need fear to function. Someone who moves from calm, not crisis. And when that shift happens, something powerful begins to unfold. Imagine a version of you who no longer needs chaos to feel alive. A version of you who doesn't wait for the cliff's edge, or the panic spike, or the familiar trembling rush of urgency. Just a quiet room, a steady breath, calm instead of crisis. Because here's the truth, you don't need panic to prove your potential. You never did. You were never lazy. You were never broken. You were never bad at time. You were scared. And you survived the only way you knew how. But now, you get to choose differently. You get to build from calm. You get to rise without fear, digging its nails into your back. You get to reclaim the self-trust that was taken from you long before deadlines ever existed. And if this video felt like a mirror, if you heard your story in these words, tell me in the comments, "I'm ready to change." And if you want more psychology videos like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because your life doesn't have to be lived at the last minute. You don't need the last minute to become the person you're meant to be.